Greetings and welcome back to room 303 in AP English, and we turn in our study of Dante's Inferno now to Canto 9. This is Circle 6, inside the city of Dis, and the heretics. And we're going to have to define what we mean by heretics, and we're going to have to make some distinctions between the non-believers who are up there in that earlier uncommitted realm. In other words, they never actually made a choice to follow God or not follow God. They are uncommitted, non-believers, and then the unbelievers. These are heretics, people who did not believe appropriately. Now, technically, heresy has everything to do with a certain religious theological bent. Dante's going to play an interesting game now for Canto 9, Canto 10, Circle 6, where he's going to talk about heresy from a little bit more of a political orientation, all right? So we'll get into this. Now, if you haven't been following our stuff at LearnStrong.net, very much recommend that you hit the AP folder there. Follow those lectures from the Iliad up through St. Augustine's Confessions. I'm giving this series of conversations assuming that all of that is knowledge for you. And as well, we've given lectures now on Cantos 1 through 8. Let's just summarize those really quickly. In Canto 1, we're told that we're on Good Friday, 7th of April, year 1300. Lost in a dark wood, Dante is. Leopards, lions, and wolves get in his way, disallowing him from climbing the hill of God. Virgil shows up. In Canto 2, we get the invocation of the Muse, and Virgil explains that Beatrice is the one that sent him to help Dante find his way. In Canto 3, we have the inscription of hell, abandon hope all ye who enter here, and the uncommitted that I was just talking about, those unbelievers. And we meet Acheron and going across the river and all of that. Dante will faint, the pilgrim will faint at the conclusion of Canto 3. Canto 4, we've got Limbo in Circle 1, unbaptized pagans. Here we have Homer, here we have Virgil, we have Aristotle as well. Canto 5, we have Circle 2. These are the jacked lovers. We meet Dido, but of course, really, Francesca and Paolo are the key note there. And then in Canto 6, we've got Circle 3, the gluttons. We meet Chaco, the prophecy about Florence, and as well, we have some conversation about Final Judgment Day. In Canto 7, we meet Circle 4. Here are the prodigals and the avaricious. They're pushing big rocks around. We have Circle 5. This is Styx, more like a marsh than a river, and the wrathful and the sullen are there. And there's an inability to communicate properly. In Canto 8, we have Philogis, who is going to take them across the river Styx. We have Felipe Argante, who will get jacked by Dante. We finally are to the city of Dis. And this is the beginning of Circle 6, but they're not allowed in. Now, in Canto 9, we're going to have the opening of the gates of Dis and the first observations about the heretics. The key, as we've said before, is that you're reading this information on your own, hopefully, and then using me as a guide. That is to say, I'll play Virgil to your Dante, the pilgrim, if you will, right? Our learning theory, just to remind, connecting new information to old information in meaningful ways, our 3 levels of annotative work, answering 3 guiding questions, allowing us this learning theory to actually be played out in real time. Level 1, what does the text mean? Level 2, level 1, what does the text say? Summarizing. Level 2, what does the text mean? At 2A, themes, messages. At 2B, remember, we are focusing on symbolism and irony, and we're really asking about Dante as poet, as political politician, and as philosopher. And then finally at level 3, we ask, how can I relate to this information in some meaningful way? At 3A, relating to other texts, especially the ones that we've been studying in AP, from the Iliad to Confessions. And then finally, how can I relate to this text personally? The brief summary of Canto 9, dividing up into kind of naturally 2 parts. An angel shows up, opens the door of Dis. Into Dis they go, and here the heretics are on fire. And as we get into Canto 10, we'll talk more about what's going on with the fire that's being used, all right? Now, let's go ahead and look at Canto number 9, and let's just enjoy the language and the reading. The outward color cowardice painted me when I beheld my leader turning back, repressed his own new pallor more hurriedly. In other words, man, I was a little bit freaked out that Virgil was freaked out. He paused with an attentive air, but like one listening, not watching, for the eye saw little in air so dark and fog so thick. In other words, it's kind of dark. We have to win this battle, he started to say. Or else, and she, who offered so much aid, late though it seems to be, and still on the way. In other words, we gotta win this battle because that's what Beatrice told me we have to do. By the way, winning this battle will immediately take us to language from the Iliad and the Aeneid, no question. So Dante is wanting to remind us, this is an epic poem about fighting, about battles, but it's a different kind of fighting. It's a fighting of the spirit, of the soul, if you will, right? I could see plainly how, line 10, he strove to hide his sentences beginning with its close. In other words, he says, I could tell Virgil was maybe a little bit worried. In different words from those he would have said, scaring me nonetheless, each broken phrase, leading me to a meaning perhaps much worse than any it held. In other words, I was struggling to try to completely understand what Virgil was actually trying to tell me. Put this in your notes. I think it's a significant moment. Dante, very deliberate in his poem, by the way. I think he's constantly talking about the inability of language. We call it sometimes translinguistic, right? The inability of language to say the important things that have to be said, especially about the salvation of the soul, right? Does anyone whose place is the first circle, now Dante the Pilgrim, it's almost like he invents a distracting question. Does anyone whose place is the first circle, where the only curse is having no hope, ever come down so far as this grim hollow? In other words, does anybody ever get out of the first circle to come all the way down here, I ask him. Such a course, now Virgil will respond, is rare among us, though once before I have been down here, beckoned as a shade by wicked Euthyphro, the conjurer who used to summon spirits of the dead back to their bodies. Now, this is an invention by Dante, where in a text by Lucan, that will be the source of this, the Pharisilia, there is in fact some mention of this, that during the battle between Julius Caesar and Pompey the Great, there was in fact the referencing of a sorceress. It's probably after the fact that Virgil will somehow be included as being the one that was in the underworld because of the Aeneid. Of course, technically, Virgil was still alive during the very time that we're referencing here. But nonetheless, this was, Virgil will say, yeah, there was once I was summoned, I had to go down. He says, my own flesh was but still a little while denuded of my shade, the time she made me enter within this wall to draw a spirit from the circle of Judas, the lowest circle of hell, which is the lowest and darkest place of all, and farthest from the heaven whose dome encloses everything in creation. He says, I know the way, be sure of that. In other words, Virgil will assure Dante, I know how to get us out of here. This quagmire, which produces so strong a stench, surrounds the city of woe. We cannot enter now except with wrath. In other words, there's going to have to be an intervention here. And he said more that I don't remember now. It's kind of an interesting line. In other words, Virgil told me several things. This is the only part of it that I can kind of remember. In other words, again, language somehow breaking down. My eyes were on the tower we stood beneath, for at its glowing top 3 hellish Furies suddenly appeared. Now, these Furies are going to remind us of Aeschylus or Asteia. The third play is in fact called the Furies or the Eumenides. And as well, we're going to have this project being reminded as well from the Aeneid, when Alecto, remember, woke up Turnus and started out as an old lady and then showed him her true self and just freaked him out because of all the snakes on her head and everything, right? Furies suddenly appeared, like women, but with a wreath of bright green hydras girdled about their bodies, blood-stained, with squirming vipers and a crown fringing their savage temples. The fierce Eurynes, he said, who know these handmaids of the queen of eternal sorrows. Of course, the queen of eternal sorrows is Persephone or Hecate if we're working in Virgil's Aeneid, right? And then we get the names of them. Megara on the left, Alecto House on the right, in between, Tryphophane. Let's play this game really quickly. The Furies are going to in some way symbolize guilty conscience, right? Each one was clawing her breast, and each one was berating herself, guilty conscience, feeling guilty, and screamed so loud, I pressed against him, Virgil, right? Flinching at the blast. And then the Furies scream, oh, let Medusa come. Now, of course, Medusa, we know, the Gorgon that will, turn you to stone because she's so horrific if you look at her. Oh, let Medusa come, the Furies bade as they looked down. Medusa here, because she can turn you into stone, might symbolize what? Hard heart, right? That heart that is unable to want salvation. And so the Furies with the guilty conscience and Medusa representing the hard heart, we might think of that standing in the way of salvation, right? the Furies bade as they looked down, to make him stone. Oh, let Medusa come to make him stone. We grieve, not avenging the assault of Theseus. Now you'll maybe remember that Theseus in mythology tried to get down into the underworld and to somehow abduct Persephone. It didn't work out, right? But he did get away because Hercules helped him to escape. And then all of a sudden, you got Virgil. He will say, turn your back in line 49. Turn your back, close your eyes, should Gorgon arrive and show herself. Then if you looked at her, there would be no returning back above. In other words, he's going to protect him. He turned me around himself, and to make sure, not trusting mine own, he covered my face with his hands too. So you get this interesting picture where Virgil will say to Dante the Pilgrim, turn around, I do not want you seeing Medusa. I'm going to cover, in fact, your eyes. And then we get this interesting line. O you whose mind is clear, understand well the lesson that underlies the veil of these strange verses I have written. Now this is one of the more interestingly challenged lines of the entire Inferno. First of all, this is Dante the poet, not Dante the Pilgrim. This is not Virgil, by the way. This is Dante the poet. And what is it that he says? He says, you whose mind is clear. That's, of course, a challenge to all readers to interpret clearly. Understand well the lesson, again, we call this text a propedeutic, that underlies the veil of these strange verses. Strange verses meaning the ones that came right before, or is Dante the poet talking about all of the Divine Comedy, or just Inferno I have written? Of course, think of it this way. If the Furies represent guilty conscience, and Medusa represents the hard heart, both of which stand in the way of salvation, then think of it. Virgil will represent reason, which alone is going to have divine aid to be able to get through the gates of death, right? Through the city of hell. Across the turbid waves now came the noise of a fearsome crash, by which both shores were shaken. A sound, and then we get this image that will sound so similar to what we read in the Aeneid several times, like that of a wind that gathers force from waves of heat and violent collision and batters the forest, and on its unchecked course shatters the branches and tears them to the ground and sweeps them off in dust clouds with scornful roars, and the wild beasts and shepherds flee at the sound. We've heard this before, haven't we? Especially in that final book of the Aeneid. Taking his hands from my eyes, he said, Virgil, now look, there where the very harshest fumes abound across the ancient scum. Look at what's coming across the Styx. And then we get another interesting simile. A truly epic simile with an as and a so. As frogs are quick to vanish through water and hunch at bottom sand as soon as they see their enemy the snake, so I saw more than 1,000 souls of the ruined, these are the fallen angels, flee before one who strode across the Styx, dry shod, as though on land. In other words, here comes an angel. With his left hand, he cleared the polluted air before his face, and only in that annoyance did he seem tired. I knew assuredly he was sent to us from heaven, and I turned my head to regard the master, who signaled that I should be mute, don't say anything, and bow before him. In the face of divinity, be quiet and show obeisance. Bow your head. To me he appeared so full of high disdain. It's as if this angel doesn't want to be down here, obviously, coming from another place, and is going to open the gates of hell, right? The gates of the city of hell, Dis. He went to the gate and opened it by means of a little wand, and we think immediately of the wand of Hermes, don't we, that we saw in our study of the Iliad and the Odyssey and the Aeneid. And there was no resistance. And then he speaks. He never speaks to Virgil and to Dante the Pilgrim. O race cast out from heaven. He's talking now to fallen angels. Exiles despised. There, we're going to get language like this in Milton's Paradise Lost. Make a note of it at 3a. He intoned, from that grim threshold, why this insolence? Why do you kick against that will whose end cannot be thwarted and whose punishments many times over have incensed your pain? Of course, we will immediately think about this line, why kick against? And it's the goads or the pricks, right, from Acts 26:14. You'll remember that Paul, in his famous conversion story, St. Augustine made quite a bit of this, didn't he, in the Confessions, asked, why do you keep kicking? Why do you keep fighting against the inevitable, in other words? What's going on? What use to butt at what the fates dispense? By the way, notice here it's the fates and it's not God. It's kind of interesting. Remember, Your Servius's throat and chin, for just this reason, still are stripped of furor. In other words, hey, don't you know the story that Hercules came down here and took Servius off? Now this is an addition for Dante. He will say, hey, he put a chain around him, and because he put the chain around his neck, the fur around the throat and the chin all wore away. Then the angel turned back on the filthy path again, not speaking a word to us, but with the air of one whom other matters must concern than those who stand before him. In other words, it's a certain kind of distance and disdain. He says what he says, and then he just turns around and walks away. And so, secure after those holy words, we in our turn stepped forward toward the city and through the gate, entering without dispute. And then we get this interesting line. Anxious to learn what their condition was, who populate a fortress so guarded. Notice this anxious can have double meaning. It can mean fearful, but it can also mean curious, right? And we've said, good students, good readers want to know, right? They're curious. Like Glaucon in Plato's Republic, brave in all things, right? A fortress so guarded, I cast my eye around as soon as I was in, and I saw a great plain filled with woe and torment. And then we get an interesting geographical simile. Has to do with two different places where it's very famous for all of the dead and the Roman graveyards that are associated with it. As on the land of Ariel, where the river Rhone grows more subdued, or at Pola, where the Corentano sets a bound for Italy, bathing her borders on every side, the ground is made uneven by the tombs, so it was here. A reference that any Dante reader would have some sense about. There's just so many Romans that died that these tombs are everywhere, right? But these graves, tombs, were of a mode more bitter. For among the graves were flames. Now again, any time that Dante uses fire, we want to pay attention to it. In fact, you want to write it down and then start making a study of when he uses fire in hell. It's kind of interesting the kinds of sins. Here we'll have the heretics, the heretics as we'll talk about in Canto 10. Here among the graves were flames that made these sepulchres glow with fiercer heat than a smith could need. Among these catacombs, the lids were raised. The tombs are not covered. With sounds of woe so great, those within surely suffered horrible pain. And let's point out that while there has been pain up to this point, no question, once we get inside the city of Dis, the pain meter goes way, way up. And the pilgrim will begin to understand why all that screaming that he heard earlier sounded like thunder. Master, I said, who are these people that are shut and sepulchred within these coffers of stone, making their sounds of anguish from inside? And he answered, here arch heretics lie, and groan along with all the converts that they made, the followers of every sect, which like entombed with like. A greater multitude crowds into these graves than you may think. I had not thought death had done so many as what Dante says earlier. Now Virgil echoes that by saying, you can't believe how many heretics there are down here. They take. Some sepulchres go hotter and some less. There's some debate about why that's the case. It might be the case that the people who should know better the most are the ones who maybe are the most punished, right? He turned, we're told then, to the right and continued to walk between the anguish and the high parapets. This idea of turning to the right is fascinating because only 2 times in all of Inferno we're going to find out, is there any turning to the right? It's always to the left in hell. In purgatory, every turn is always to the right. Now, why specifically these two? Some have pointed out that it has everything to do with what we're moving from and into. So the next time we see this, we'll point it out and we'll kind of say it's a major movement, that we might say, away from where we've been to where we're going. In some ways, this is Dante's, the poet, way of saying, I'm going to set you up for what you are about to see coming. It's going to be something unlike anything you've seen before. And of course, Dante, the poet, is wanting to create a bit of tension in the mind of the reader who would say, I wonder what's going to happen next. We'll get to it in Canto 10 in a bit. Let's go ahead and work level 2 and 3. At 2a, well, let's say it out loud. The power of God is obviously way more powerful than demonic power. Let's not forget, as I said about the Iliad, the Odyssey, the Aeneid, these are, and certainly Inferno falls into this category I'm about to talk about. These are religious texts. Let's not forget this. They're not just texts of adventure. They are religious texts. They are designed to teach us something. And this, of course, as a Catholic Christian poem, is going to say, reason can only take you so far. And then, deity has to show up in the form of an angel or whatever. Another interesting message is sometimes it's better not to look, right? Notice Virgil, in fact, put his hand over the face of Dante the pilgrim, right? And then we get that very enigmatic thing about, I hope that you can figure out exactly what it is that I'm talking about here. Those with a mind that want to know it. Of course, another major message is heretics are dangerous, but more dangerous are all the people that they convert. That is to say, the people who they damage, right? Now, for example, back to our earlier comments, the reason why mosques are going to be included and the Muslim faith is going to be included for Dante is that Dante didn't see this, the Muslim faith, as another faith. He just saw this as a Christian heresy, okay? And that will explain why heretics here, right? And finally, the difficulty of interpretation. It's so important to be able to completely always understand everything. I think the other reason why that line that we were talking about is so important is because I think Dante the poet is saying to we as readers, as he will be suggesting to Dante the pilgrim, you don't always come to illumination quickly. It takes a lot of work. It takes a lot of hard work. Reading this poem is not easy, right? Especially those of you who are trying to read and figure this stuff out on your own. The symbolism at 2b, Dis, of course, with its closed doors, represents, of course, that notion of the heretics who have their closed minds, unwilling to accept the truth. Or, we might say, too Promethean and are demanding that they have some explanations that ultimately should probably just be taken on faith. The irony at 2b is, again, the line, why kick against the will, right? And that is to say, what God has demanded to be the case. I mean, think of it. Who's he saying that line to? A bunch of fallen angels. In other words, dude, didn't you guys learn your lesson the first time, is the point, the irony, right? The other is, of course, there's no point in fighting this because it's inevitable in Dante's world that these angels are all going to get jacked. I mean, it's inevitable. So why close the doors? You know that they're going to